The scream came before the sun did. It tore out of the royal nursery and rolled down the stone halls of the citadel, sharp enough to wake every wolf within the walls. One heartbeat of silence followed. Then the whole palace broke apart at once. Torches flared along the courtyard. Guards ran in every direction, boots pounding against frost-covered stone. The nursery stood empty. 2 small beds, still warm, no children in them. Alpha King Jaime stood on the high balcony overlooking the kingdom, and he did not move. He did not need to shout. The stillness rolling off his shoulders was heavier than any roar could have been, a pressure that made the guards below lower their eyes without knowing why. Captain Eldon crossed the marble floor and dropped to one knee before him. "Your Majesty. The twins are gone. Both of them." Jaime's hands closed slowly around the stone railing. "Gone where?" "We searched the nursery, the gardens, the kitchens. They are nowhere in the keep." A pause. Eldon's voice dropped lower, as if saying the next part quietly might soften it. "The Omega is missing too. The one exiled this morning." Nobody needed to say her name. It was already burning through the minds of everyone standing in that courtyard. May. The assumption spread through the palace like fire through dry grass. A rejected Omega, a nobody, a girl the council had called worthless only hours before, had vanished the same night as the future rulers of the kingdom. There was only one story anyone wanted to believe. She had taken them. Jaime turned from the balcony at last. His eyes, usually a calm and distant gray, had gone bright and sharp, the color of a blade catching moonlight. "Wake every tracker in the kingdom," he said. "Find her before daylight." Trackers gathered their gear in the courtyard, breath fogging in the cold morning air. Horses stamped their hooves against frozen ground. Somewhere in the crowd, a nursemaid wept openly, certain she would be blamed for failing to notice 2 small beds emptying in the middle of the night. Lord Horace arrived at the courtyard last, his robes immaculate despite the early hour, his face arranged into perfect concern. "A tragedy," he said smoothly, standing close enough for the king to hear him. Though perhaps not entirely a surprise. "We warned the council that girl carried more danger than her rank suggested." Jaime said nothing. He mounted his horse without a word and rode through the gates before the sun had fully cleared the tree line, leaving Horace standing in the courtyard with a satisfaction he was careful not to let show on his face. But 12 hours earlier, before the bells ever rang, before the panic and the accusations, there had been a girl walking alone toward the forest with nothing but a torn cloak and a broken heart. And 2 small pairs of feet had quietly begun following her. Chapter 1, The Worthless Omega. May had learned early that love in her father's house came with conditions she could never meet. Coral was a merchant with cold eyes and colder hands, a man who measured his daughter's worth the same way he measured grain, by what she could bring him. May's mother had died when she was small, and with her went the only warmth the house had ever known. What remained was duty, silence, and the constant reminder that an Omega girl was lucky to be fed at all. She grew up quiet. She grew up careful. She learned to disappear into corners of rooms so that nobody would notice her and find a reason to be angry. The other merchants' daughters wore fine wool and attended small gatherings in the lower town, laughing over things May had never been allowed to care about. She was kept instead for chores, for ledgers, for carrying crates through the cold before dawn so her father's shop would be ready when customers arrived. When she made a mistake, however small, Coral's voice filled the house until the walls themselves seemed to shrink around her. When she succeeded, he said nothing at all, as if kindness were a coin he refused to spend. She never once complained. Complaining, she had learned, only gave him more reasons to remind her how little she had to offer. Some nights, when the house was silent and her father had already retired, May would take out the single ribbon her mother had left behind, worn thin with age, and press it between her palms as if enough stillness might bring back some memory of the woman's voice. She had been too young when her mother died to remember much beyond warmth and the smell of wood smoke, but she held on to that faint memory carefully, the only proof she had that someone, once, had loved her without conditions attached. The one place she never had to hide was the royal nursery. She had first been sent there as a girl of 16, delivering cloth on her father's behalf, and a small hand had reached out from behind a curtain and tugged at her sleeve. Kai had been 3 years old then, curious and unafraid, and Jill had peered out beside him with the same wide gray eyes their father carried. From that day, whenever Coral's business brought May anywhere near the palace, she found reasons to slip toward the nursery instead of hurrying home. Twin heir Kai and his sister Jill had taken to her the way children take to warmth, without hesitation and without asking why. May braided ribbons into Jill's hair. She told Kai stories about brave wolves who protected the weak instead of ruling over them. When the twins had nightmares, it was May who sat by their bed until morning, humming softly until their small shoulders finally relaxed. She never asked to be paid for it, and never mentioned it to her father. It was the only part of her life that belonged entirely to her, small and quiet and hers alone. Nobody at court noticed this kindness. Nobody at court noticed her at all, until her father needed her silence for something far darker than chores. Coral had been meeting privately with Lord Horace, an elder of the council whose smile never quite reached his eyes. May did not understand politics, but she understood fear, and she saw both men speaking in hushed voices about weakening the king's guard on a night when a caravan of stolen goods needed to pass unseen through the northern gate. When her father ordered her to lie to the guards on his behalf, May refused for the first time in her life. It cost her everything. Coral did not hesitate. He went before the full council the next morning and accused his own daughter of treason, claiming she had tried to smuggle enemies of the crown into the palace. Horace, standing beside him with practiced calm, added quiet words that made the lie sound like truth. Witnesses, paid and frightened, nodded along. The council chamber was full that morning, nobles and elders crowded along the stone benches, whispering before May had even been brought forward. She stood alone in the center of the hall in her plainest dress, aware of every eye weighing her before a single word had been spoken in her defense. She refused a direct order from her own father, Horace said, his voice carrying easily to every corner of the room, and now claims innocence only after her scheme unraveled. What honest daughter defies her household unless she has something to hide? May opened her mouth to explain, to say that the order she had refused was one that would have endangered the palace guard, not protected it, but her voice came out smaller than she intended, and Coral's booming denial swallowed it whole before the council had finished hearing it. Jaime sat upon the throne and listened to every word with a stillness that gave nothing away. He did not believe the accusation, not fully, but ancient pack law was clear. When enough voices rose against an Omega with no rank and no protector, exile was the only path the council would allow, and a king who ignored his counsel too openly gave his enemies a reason to whisper about weakness. He looked at May only once. "Leave before sunrise," he said, "and do not return." May searched his face for even a flicker of doubt, something to hold onto as the guards moved to escort her out, but Jaime's expression remained carved from stone, and she understood then that a king's silence could wound just as deeply as any spoken cruelty. May did not cry in front of the court. She saved that for the empty road outside the palace gates, where the cold wind could carry her tears away before anyone saw them fall. She walked toward the forbidden northern forest with a torn cloak wrapped around her shoulders and nothing else to her name. She expected to die there, quietly, the way she had lived, unnoticed by the world that had never wanted her. She did not expect to hear small footsteps crunching in the snow behind her. Chapter 2, Tiny Footprints. May turned first toward Kai's voice, small and stubborn against the wind. "You're not allowed to be alone out here." Jill stood just behind her brother, hugging her own arms against the cold, cheeks already pink from the walk. "Go back," May said, her voice cracking. "Please. Your father will think I stole you. Then we'll tell him the truth," Kai said, chin lifted the exact way his father lifted his when he refused to back down from anything. May knelt in the snow before them, torn between fear and a warmth she had not felt in years. I am not allowed near you anymore, she whispered. I could be killed for this. Jill reached out and took her hand anyway, small fingers curling tightly around hers. You're the only one who ever stayed with us at night, she said. We're not letting you be alone either. There was no arguing with loyalty that pure. May understood, in that moment, that turning them away now, deep in the forest with the sun already sinking, would be more dangerous than letting them stay close enough to protect. She thought, briefly, of turning back toward the palace gates herself, of handing the twins over to the first guard she found and accepting whatever punishment came from being caught near them. But the gates were already far behind, and the light was already fading, and somewhere deep down she knew that no explanation would matter if she was the one found holding their hands when the guards finally came looking. There was only one direction left that made any sense at all. Forward, together, and careful. They found shelter beneath a fallen tree as darkness fell completely. May built a small fire with hands that shook from cold rather than fear, and the twins huddled close to her sides. Somewhere in the trees, a wolf howled, long and low, and Jill flinched into May's shoulder. Tell us a story, Kai said. Like you used to. So May told them of a wolf born without rank or title, who saved her pack not through strength but through choosing kindness when kindness cost her everything. Kai's eyes grew heavy halfway through. Jill fell asleep first, her small hand still holding onto May's sleeve. Before sleep took him fully, Kai murmured one more question into the dark. Do you think Father is angry? May considered the question carefully before answering, unwilling to promise something she could not know for certain. I think he's frightened, she said gently. Fathers show fear strangely sometimes. It often looks like anger from the outside. Kai seemed to accept that answer, his breathing slowing into sleep soon after, and May stayed awake long after, watching the fire, listening to the forest, aware that somewhere behind them, a king was likely just discovering his children were gone. She thought of the years she had spent believing herself worthless, and how strange it felt that the one truly good thing she had left behind at the palace had chosen, on its own, to follow her into exile rather than stay somewhere safe without her. She was right about the palace. By the time the sun rose, the palace was already a storm of shouting voices and frightened servants, and Jaime stood at the center of it, his fury a silence colder than the winter outside. Chapter 3, The King's Hunt. Jaime did not sleep. He rode out with his best trackers before the light had fully broken, following faint prints in the snow that led toward the forbidden forest. Captain Eldon rode beside him, keeping his voice low. The council is already saying it, Your Majesty. That she planned this from the start. That her father's accusation was true after all. My father-in-law's accusation, Jaime said sharply, came from a man who has never once told the truth without something to gain from it. Eldon said nothing to that. He had served long enough to recognize doubt hiding behind anger. Back at the palace, Lord Horace moved through the halls with the calm of a man watching pieces fall exactly where he had placed them. He met privately with Coral in a shadowed corridor. The king rides after her himself, Horace said. Good. Let him waste his strength chasing a girl in the snow while we finish preparing the council vote. Coral's jaw tightened. And if he finds her? If the children explain themselves? Horace's smile did not waver. Children can be confused. Frightened. Easily led to believe whatever comforts them most. We simply need to reach them before their story becomes inconvenient for us. And how do you propose we reach them first? Coral asked, when the king already has every tracker in the kingdom searching. Patience, Horace said. The forest will slow the king far more than it slows two children accustomed to trailing after a farm girl. We have time yet, so long as neither of us grows careless. Neither man noticed the young attendant, Lila, standing just close enough to hear every word, her heart pounding as she backed quietly away to find someone who might listen. She did not yet know who to trust with what she had heard. Horus held rank far above her own, and accusing an elder of the council on the strength of overheard words alone could end far worse for her than for him. She decided, for now, to wait and watch, and to remember every detail exactly as she had heard it. Deep in the forest, Jamie's trackers lost the trail as snow began to fall harder, the wind erasing footprints almost as quickly as they were found. Willie, a young servant who had begged to join the search party out of loyalty to the twins he adored, trudged through drifts up to his knees, calling their names into the trees until his voice went hoarse. "Nothing this way, Your Majesty," he reported, teeth chattering. "But the snow hides everything. We could walk past them and never know." Jamie said little, though his eyes swept the tree line with an intensity that unsettled even his most seasoned guards. He caught, at last, the faintest trace of his own children's scent tangled with May's, moving steadily north, together, not apart, not one dragged behind the other. Something in his certainty cracked, just slightly, though he refused yet to admit it. Back within the palace walls, the council chamber buzzed with nervous energy. Several elders pressed Horus for answers about the missing heirs, and he answered each question with the same practiced patience, careful never to appear too eager for any particular outcome. "The king rides north," he told them calmly. "We must trust his judgment, of course, though I confess I fear what state he may find the children in, given the company they apparently kept." One older elder, a stern woman named Counselor Wren who had never fully trusted Horus's polished manners, studied him carefully. "You speak as though you already know how this ends," she said. Horus smiled thinly. "I speak only as a man who has seen many exiles before. Rarely do they end well for anyone involved." Wren said nothing further, though she filed the exchange away in her memory, unconvinced by his easy confidence. Chapter 4, The Frozen Forest. The forest grew harsher the further north they walked. May rationed the small amount of dried food she had carried, giving the larger share to the twins each time, though her own stomach ached with hunger. The children never complained, not once, though May noticed the way Jill's steps grew slower each hour and the way Kai had started walking a little behind his sister, ready to catch her if her legs finally gave out. May carried Jill on her back for the last stretch of the second day, her own legs burning with the effort, refusing to admit how tired she had become. On the second night, a pack of wild wolves circled their fire, drawn by the scent of exhaustion and fear. Kai stepped in front of his sister without thinking, small fists raised uselessly against creatures 3 times his size. May pulled him back and stood between the children and the circling wolves herself, voice steady despite her racing heart. "You will not touch them," she said, low and even, meeting each set of hungry eyes without blinking. Whether it was her steadiness or simple luck, the wolves eventually retreated into the trees. Jill did not let go of May's cloak for the rest of the night. They found a frozen stream on the morning of the third day, and May spent nearly an hour cracking through the ice with a sharpened branch just to fill their water skins, her fingers going numb long before she finished. Kai insisted on helping, though his small hands could do little more than hold the skins steady while May worked. Jill gathered dry moss for the fire, humming quietly to herself, a small habit May recognized instantly as one of the lullabies she herself had once sung to the girl. By the third day, the cold had turned dangerous. Jill's lips had gone faintly blue, and May wrapped her own cloak fully around the girl, walking through the biting wind in only her thin dress. Kai noticed and said nothing, but he pressed closer to May's side, sharing what little warmth remained between them. That night, huddled in a shallow cave, Jill finally asked the question that had clearly been sitting in her small chest for days. "Why did they send you away? You never did anything wrong." May smoothed the girl's hair back gently. "Sometimes," she said quietly, "the people with the loudest voices decide what is true, even when it isn't. It doesn't mean you stop being good. It just means you have to survive long enough for the truth to catch up." Kai studied her for a long moment. "When I'm king, he said firmly, no one gets sent away for telling the truth. May smiled for the first time in days, small and tired, but real. She had not expected comfort to come from an 8-year-old boy trying so hard to sound like a grown man, and yet it steadied something inside her that had been cracking for days. She pulled both children closer against the cold, and for a little while, wrapped in the thin warmth of a dying fire, the three of them felt less like an exile and two runaways, and more like a small, strange family finding its way through the dark together. Outside the cave, snow began falling harder, and somewhere beyond the tree line, torchlight flickered through the storm. Chapter 5, Truth Beneath the Snow. Jamie found them at dawn, huddled together in the shallow cave, May's cloak wrapped around both children while she herself shivered in the cold. For one long moment, none of them moved. Jamie's eyes swept over his children, alive, breathing, safe, and something in his chest that had been locked tight since the moment they vanished finally loosened. Then his gaze landed on May, and old suspicion rose again. "Step away from them," he said. Kai moved instead, placing himself firmly between his father and May. "She didn't take us," he said. "We followed her. She tried to send us home every single day." Jill nodded fiercely beside her brother. "She gave me her cloak. She hasn't eaten properly in 3 days so we could." Jamie's jaw worked silently as he took in the scene before him, truly seeing it for the first time. A girl half frozen, clearly starved, who had spent every ounce of her own strength protecting the children the entire kingdom believed she had stolen. Eldon, standing just behind the king, spoke quietly. "Your Majesty. Look at her hands." May's fingers were raw and cracked from building fires each night, her knuckles scraped from clearing branches for shelter. These were not the injuries of a kidnapper moving in comfort. These were the injuries of someone who had given everything she had left to keep 2 children alive. Jamie knelt slowly in the snow before her, his voice quieter now. "Why?" he asked. "After everything the crown did to you. Why protect them at all?" May met his eyes, exhausted but steady. "Because they were kind to me when no one else was," she said simply. "And because they're children. None of this was ever their fault, or mine." Jamie stripped his own fur-lined cloak from his shoulders and wrapped it around May without a word, the gesture saying far more than any apology could have managed in that moment. Kai watched the exchange carefully, then looked up at his father with the same stubborn set to his jaw May had grown used to seeing over the last 3 days. "You have to fix this," he said. "The council said she was dangerous. She's the least dangerous person I've ever met." Jamie let out a breath that was almost a laugh, though there was no humor left in his exhausted face. "I intend to," he said quietly. "I should have looked closer before I ever let it happen." For the first time since the accusation had been made against her, someone with real power looked at May and saw the truth instead of the story built around her. The journey out of the shallow cave took most of the morning, Jamie himself insisting on carrying Jill against the cold while Eldon walked close beside May, steadying her when her exhausted legs threatened to give out on the icy path. "You did not have to protect them the way you did," Eldon said quietly, watching her carefully. "Many would have let them go, or worse, used them to bargain for their own safety. They trusted me," May answered simply. "I was not going to be the reason that trust was misplaced." Eldon said nothing further, though something in his weathered face softened, and from that morning on, he counted himself among the first in the palace guard to believe her innocent. If you have been enjoying this story so far, go ahead and subscribe to see how this unfolds, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I would love to say hello to you, just to know how far our story is traveling. Chapter 6, The Hidden Betrayal. The journey back to the palace was not the triumphant return anyone expected. Word reached the citadel that the king had found the missing heirs alive and unharmed, and that the Omega blamed for their disappearance had, in truth, protected them the entire time. Horus received this news with an outwardly calm face, though beneath it, panic had already begun spreading like cracks through ice. He met Coral in the same shadowed corridor as before, this time with far less patience. "We need another accusation," Horace said. "Something the children cannot contradict. Something that removes her permanently before the king's doubt becomes certainty." Coral hesitated, and for the briefest moment something like guilt flickered across his hardened face. "She is still my daughter." "She is a liability," Horace snapped. "One that threatens both our futures if the king begins asking who truly ordered that caravan through the northern gate that night." "You said the plan was simple," Coral muttered. "Accuse her, exile her, and the whole matter disappears quietly." "Plans change when a king starts asking questions," Horace replied. "And your daughter, it seems, has made herself very difficult to simply forget." It was the first time Coral heard, spoken plainly, that Horace had never intended to protect him either, only to use him for as long as he remained useful. He said nothing more that day, but the words stayed with him longer than he expected, curling uncomfortably in his chest through the following nights. Meanwhile, back at the palace, Lila finally found the courage to approach Captain Eldon directly, repeating everything she had overheard days earlier in the corridor. Eldon listened in careful silence, then brought her straight to the king's chambers the moment Jaime returned. Jaime listened to Lila's account without interrupting, his expression darkening with every word. "Horace has been playing this kingdom like a game of stones," he said quietly, "and I allowed it because I trusted the wrong voices." That night, as the royal party traveled the final stretch back toward the citadel, an ambush struck from the tree line. Torches were knocked from riders' hands, horses reared in panic, and arrows whistled through the dark with a precision that suggested paid hands rather than desperate bandits. Their intent became clear within seconds, aimed not at the king himself, but at the girl walking silently beside his children. May shoved Jill out of the arrow's path an instant before it struck her own shoulder instead, and the forest erupted into chaos. Guards scattered into the trees after the fleeing attackers while Jaime dropped from his horse, catching May before she hit the ground, his voice tight with alarm as he called for Jason. Chapter 7, The Palace Divided. May's wound was not fatal, though it bled heavily until Jason, the royal healer, arrived to tend to it within the hour. Jaime remained at her side throughout, his usual composure replaced by something rawer, something he did not bother hiding from his own guards any longer. "She took an arrow meant for my daughter," he told Eldon quietly. "And still the council will call her dangerous." He was right. When the royal party returned to the citadel, the court was already divided sharply in two. Some nobles whispered relief that the heirs had returned safely. Others, loyal to Horace's faction, whispered that an Omega surviving an assassination attempt proved nothing except her own cunning. Willie, ever cheerful even in tense halls, took to bringing May extra bread and warm broth each evening, insisting loudly to anyone who questioned it that a wounded guest of the crown deserved proper care regardless of what the gossiping nobles thought. His small kindness became one of the few bright spots in May's slow recovery. Jaime placed May under direct royal protection despite the protests, assigning guards to her chamber and ignoring the murmurs that followed him through every hallway. It was during her recovery that something quieter began growing between them. Jaime visited more often than a king needed to visit an injured guest. He asked about her childhood, her mother, the stories she told his children at night. May, cautious at first, slowly allowed herself to answer honestly, surprised to find a king willing to simply listen. One evening, as candlelight flickered low in her chamber, Jaime sat beside her bed and admitted something he had not said aloud to anyone. "My father taught me that a king who bends for one person eventually bends for everyone," he said quietly. "I believed him for a long time." "And now?" May asked. "Now I think a king who never bends simply breaks the people beneath him instead," Jaime said. "I nearly broke you before I ever understood the difference. I signed your exile knowing something in it felt wrong," he continued. "I told myself it was law. It was cowardice." May studied him for a long moment. "You came back for me anyway." "I came back for my children," he said softly, and found I could not leave without you either." The space between them had grown smaller than either of them had planned, and when Jamie finally closed it, brushing his lips gently against hers, it was not desperate or rushed, but quiet, certain, the kind of closeness that comes only after real trust has been earned. May let herself lean into the moment for a heartbeat, feeling for the first time in her life that she was wanted rather than merely tolerated, before pulling back gently, mindful of guards beyond the door and a court not yet ready to accept what had just passed between them. "They will not accept this easily," she murmured. "They accepted a lie about you for months," Jamie answered. "They can learn to accept the truth." In the weeks that followed, May's wound healed fully, though something else in her seemed to heal alongside it. She began walking the palace gardens each evening, no longer as a servant's daughter passing quietly through, but as a guest the guards greeted by name. Jamie found reasons to join her more often than either of them commented on. One night, beneath a sky clear enough to show every star, he took her hand as they walked, lacing his fingers through hers without asking permission, and she let him. "The council still argues about my judgment where you're concerned," he said, a faint, rare smile touching his mouth. "Let them argue," May said. "I spent my whole life being decided about by people who never once asked what I wanted. I would rather you simply asked me instead." Jamie stopped walking and turned to face her fully, his expression softer than the court had ever seen it. "Then I am asking," he said quietly. "Stay. Not because my children love you, though they do. Not because you saved my life in that ambush. Stay because I have not felt like myself since the morning I signed your exile, and I do not wish to feel that way again." May reached up and rested her palm against his jaw, feeling the warmth of him beneath her cold fingers. "I already decided to stay," she whispered, "the moment you knelt in the snow and finally saw me." He kissed her then, slow and unhurried, beneath the open sky where anyone might have seen them and neither cared. When they finally parted, foreheads still resting together, Jamie murmured against her hair that whatever the council decided, his decision had already been made the night he found her shivering in that cave, holding his children like they were her own. Unseen from a shadowed archway above the garden, Horace watched the two of them together, aware that his window to remove May quietly had nearly closed for good. Chapter 8, The Moonheart Legacy. Jason the healer approached May privately several days later, holding an old, worn journal that had belonged to her late mother, recovered quietly by Lila from the merchant house before Coral could destroy it. "Your mother was not simply a servant, as you were told," Jason said carefully. "She carried a bloodline the pack believed had vanished generations ago. The Moonheart line." May had heard the old stories, whispered legends about healers who carried the moon goddess's gift directly in their blood, capable of drawing sickness and curses out of others at great cost to themselves. She had always assumed they were simply tales told to comfort frightened children. The journal told a different story. Her mother had hidden her heritage out of fear, aware that such power made her a target for those seeking to control it rather than honor it. She had died young, before she ever explained the truth to her daughter, leaving May to grow up believing she carried nothing of value at all. Page after page described the same aching fear, written in her mother's careful hand. Fear of what would happen if the wrong person learned what slept in her blood. Fear of raising a daughter who might carry the same gift and the same danger. May read long into the night, tracing her fingers over words written by a woman she barely remembered, feeling, for the first time in years, less alone than she had in a very long while. "Why show me this now?" May asked quietly. Jason's expression turned grave. "Because Horace has been searching the old palace archives for the same legend. If he learns what you carry before you do, he will not hesitate to use it against the crown." That fear proved justified faster than anyone expected. Horace, desperate and cornered, made contact with an exiled sorcerer once banished from the kingdom for illegal use of an ancient artifact known as the Moonstone, a relic capable of unleashing devastating curses when activated by someone willing to pay its price. He traveled beyond the kingdom's border under the cover of a hunting trip, meeting the sorcerer in a crumbling watchtower long abandoned by the pack. The sorcerer, gaunt and hollow-eyed from years of exile, listened to Horace's request with quiet amusement. "The moonstone does not forgive the hand that wields it," the sorcerer warned. "It will take payment from you as surely as from your enemies." "I have already given this kingdom my loyalty for 30 years, Horace replied coldly. "I intend to collect what I am owed, one way or another." Horace was willing. In a final, desperate bid to seize control before the king's trust in him collapsed entirely, Horace arranged for the stone to be smuggled into the palace itself, hidden among ceremonial gifts prepared for an upcoming council gathering meant to formally clear May's name. Coral, watching his own ambition crumble around him, made one final choice that surprised even himself. He sent Lila a warning, unsigned, admitting everything he knew about Horace's plan, though whether from guilt or simple self-preservation, even he could not fully say. The warning arrived only hours before the council gathering was set to begin. Chapter 9, The Longest Night. The Great Hall was full when Horace made his move, activating the moonstone in the chaos of the gathering crowd before guards could reach him. The room erupted into screaming as nobles scrambled away from the dark light pulsing outward from the stone in his raised hand, but the damage was already done before a single guard laid a hand on him. A wave of dark energy rolled outward, and both Kai and Jill collapsed instantly, their small bodies racked with a cold no fire could warm and no ordinary healer could touch. Jason worked desperately over them, his hands trembling, his usual calm shattered by helplessness. "I cannot reach whatever this is," he admitted, voice breaking. "This is beyond anything I know how to heal." Jamie knelt beside his children, gripping their cold hands, his composure finally breaking completely in front of the entire court. "Then someone find a way," he said, voice raw, "because I will not lose them." May stepped forward, her mother's journal clutched tightly in her hand, understanding rising in her chest even as fear rose alongside it. She had read enough of her mother's journal to know what came next, and what it might cost. The old pages had described the gift plainly. A Moonheart healer could pull sickness, poison, even the darkest curse from another body, but only by accepting it fully into her own. There was no partial version of the gift. There was no safe distance to keep. "I might be able to," she said quietly. "But I do not fully understand what it will cost me." Jamie caught her arm. "Then we find another way." "There is no other way," May said gently. "And I would rather try and fail than watch them suffer while I do nothing." She knelt between the twins, placing one hand over each small chest, and closed her eyes. The old, dormant gift buried in her blood answered a call it had waited its entire existence to receive. Golden light spread slowly from her hands, drawing the dark curse out of the children and into herself instead, absorbing pain that no ordinary body was ever meant to carry. Jill's breathing steadied first. Then Kai's. Color returned to their small faces as the curse drained fully out of them. May, however, grew pale and still, her own strength collapsing under the weight of what she had taken on. Jamie caught her before she fell completely, cradling her against him as panic flooded his voice for the first time in his life. "Stay with me," he said. "Stay with me, May." Lila knelt nearby, tears streaming freely, clutching May's mother's journal against her chest as though it might somehow help. Eldon had already dragged Horace roughly toward the guards waiting at the hall's entrance, the elder's calm composure finally gone, replaced by wide, frantic eyes as he realized how completely his plan had collapsed around him. The great hall, once divided by suspicion and whispered doubt, fell completely silent, watching a king beg an Omega the court had once called worthless not to leave him. Chapter 10, The Queen of Dawn. May did not die that night, though for several long hours it seemed she might. Jason worked tirelessly beside her, drawing on knowledge of the old healing texts Jamie had ordered brought from the archive immediately, and slowly, the golden light beneath her skin steadied rather than faded. She woke 2 days later to find Jamie still seated beside her bed, exhausted but unwilling to leave. Kai and Jill had insisted on visiting every few hours, refusing to believe she was truly recovering until they saw her open her eyes themselves. When she finally did, Jill burst into tears of relief and climbed carefully onto the edge of the bed, while Kai simply gripped her hand tightly, saying nothing at all, needing nothing more than the proof that she was still there. Horus was arrested before the sun rose the same night the curse broke, his connection to the exiled sorcerer and the smuggled moonstone laid bare before the full council. Coral, stripped of the wealth and status he had built through years of manipulation, was left with nothing but the consequences of choices he could no longer outrun, abandoned by every ally he had once tried to control. The formal judgment took place 3 days later, the great hall packed once more, though this time the mood carried none of the fear that had gripped it during Horus's attack. Counselor Wren, who had never trusted Horus's polished words, read the charges aloud herself, her voice steady and unforgiving. Conspiracy against the crown. Illegal use of a banned artifact. Attempted harm against the royal heirs. She lowered the scroll and looked directly at Horus. The council finds no argument left to make in your defense. Horus said nothing in his own defense, his composure finally, completely gone. He was led from the hall in chains, the same hall where he had once commanded every conversation with a single practiced smile. Coral's judgment came quieter, and briefer. Stripped of his merchant title and his standing within the kingdom, he was banished to the farthest reaches of the pack's territory, permitted to live, though never again permitted to hold influence over anyone's fate but his own. Jaime stood before the assembled court once May had recovered enough to stand beside him, and he did not soften his words for anyone still clinging to old prejudice. This kingdom nearly lost the very thing that saved it, he said, because we decided a person's worth by their rank instead of their heart. That ends today. He turned to May, taking her hand in front of the entire court without hesitation. She is not beneath this throne, he said. She is the reason it still stands. The moon goddess's blessing was said to shine brightest on unions built through trial rather than convenience, and when Jaime marked May as his queen before the kingdom, even the oldest and most stubborn elders found no argument left to raise against it. The court that gathered for the ceremony looked nothing like the one that had condemned her months earlier. Nobles who had once whispered against her now bowed their heads with genuine respect, aware that they were witnessing something far greater than a simple royal wedding. Willie stood near the back grinning from ear to ear, and Lila wept openly, this time from joy instead of fear. Even Jason, usually so composed, allowed himself a proud smile as he watched the girl he had helped save now stand as queen before the entire kingdom. Kai and Jill stood proudly at the ceremony, no longer frightened children hiding in a forest, but a prince and princess who had chosen, on their own, to follow the one person who had ever shown them true kindness without asking for anything in return. The kingdom that had once exiled an Omega for a crime she never committed slowly began rewriting its oldest laws, ensuring no one would ever again be cast aside for the same reasons May had been. If this story moved you even a little, please subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, and leave a comment telling me where in the world you are watching from. I read every single one, and I would truly love to say hello to you personally. Epilogue. Years later, the Citadel still told the story of the winter night 2 small footprints followed an exiled Omega into the forest, and how those same footprints eventually led an entire kingdom toward a kinder future. May ruled not with fear, but with the same quiet steadiness she had shown in the frozen forest, listening to every voice in her kingdom, especially the ones others had learned to ignore. She established a council seat specifically for Omegas, insisting that a kingdom which had once nearly destroyed her simply for her rank would never again make that mistake with anyone else. Jaime became known less for his silence and more for the fairness he brought to every judgment that crossed his throne, often recalling openly, before new councils and visiting dignitaries, how close he had come to losing everything through his own inherited assumptions. Kai grew into a young man who never forgot his promise made in that shallow cave, ensuring no one in his father's kingdom was ever punished simply for telling the truth. He trained under Eldon for years, eventually becoming one of the most trusted young commanders the pack had seen in a generation, remembered fondly by the guards for his fierce loyalty to anyone he considered family. Jill grew alongside him with the same gentle compassion May had shown her through every freezing night in the wilderness, eventually studying beside Jason to learn the healer's craft herself, determined to help others the way she had once been helped. Coral lived out his remaining years far from the kingdom's wealth and comfort he had once clawed so desperately to protect, working small trades in a distant village where nobody knew his name or his history. It was said that he sent one letter to the palace before he died, addressed simply to his daughter, though its contents were never made public. May kept it, and read it only once. Willie remained at the palace for the rest of his working years, forever proud of the extra bread and broth he had once smuggled to a wounded stranger nobody else dared to comfort. Lila rose through the ranks of the palace staff, eventually overseeing the entire household, remembered by every servant beneath her for the same quiet courage she had shown the night she chose to speak up. And somewhere in the palace archives, beside the old legend of the Moonheart line, a new page was added, one that spoke not of power, but of a girl who had nothing left to give and gave it anyway. What this story teaches us. A person's true worth is never decided by their birth, their rank, or the number of people willing to speak against them. It is revealed in the quiet moments no one is watching, in small kindnesses given freely and sacrifices made without expectation of reward. Kindness shown to a child costs nothing, yet it can shape the kind of person that child becomes for the rest of their life. Kai and Jill's loyalty to May did not come from anything she gave them beyond attention and patience, proof that the smallest acts of care often leave the deepest marks. Loyalty built on trust will always outlast loyalty built on fear or control. Horus commanded respect through manipulation for years, yet the moment his schemes were exposed, not a single ally remained willing to defend him. May earned nothing through manipulation at all, and still found an entire kingdom standing behind her when it mattered most. Betrayal, no matter how carefully hidden, tends to unravel on its own timeline. Coral and Horus believed their secrets were safe simply because no one had confronted them yet, but truth has a patient way of finding daylight eventually. Judging someone by their rank, their circumstances, or the number of people speaking against them rarely reveals who they truly are. It often takes one honest look, freely given, to see what everyone else overlooked. And compassion, even when it goes unnoticed for years, has a way of eventually being seen exactly when it matters most. Thank you for staying until the very end of this story.